Devin Singletary was a good player for them last year. They let him walk, decided to give up an asset for Joe Mixon, and then sign Joe Mixon to a multi-year contract. Everything that they did to me suggests they view Joe Mixon as a relatively significant upgrade on Devin Singletary. Is that the right assessment? And what do you expect from Joe Mixon?
Yes, that's the right assessment. And before they ended up with Mixon, they kind of ended up with Joe Mixon. They kind of settled for Joe Mixon. They wanted Saquon Barkley. I mean, they desperately wanted Saquon Barkley. The money didn't work out. Saquon's desire to play the Cowboys, twice a year, that factored into it a little bit because I think the money was pretty close. So they wanted a multi-purpose bell cow. And when Barkley wasn't there and some of the other guys had come off the board, they made the call on Joe Mixon and they got him. What?
Why are you shaking your head? You're welcome.
CJ Stroud is coming off arguably the greatest rookie season for a quarterback ever. The Houston Texans just traded for a 4-time Pro Bowl wide receiver and signed another to a $75 million contract extension. Yet none of those guys are Cody Stoots' favorite Texan to draft in 2024. The Houston football beat reporter joined me to discuss the player he's most excited about from a fantasy perspective and a whole lot more. I'm Joe Dolan. Like this video, leave a comment, and subscribe to the FantasyPoints YouTube channel for 32 breakdowns of all 32 NFL teams. This is Franchise Focus, Houston Texans. Cody, I want to start with the bigger picture thing for the Texans here. Last year we talked and I actually think we had a discussion about whether there would be a legitimate quarterback competition between CJ Stroud and Davis Mills. And you said at the time, no way, it's Stroud's job. Sure. But that's just a highlight into the mindset we had last year with this Texans team, not knowing how good or frankly how bad they were going to be. Remember, people trashed them for the Will Anderson trade because everybody thought they were going to suck and were going to give up a top 10 pick. That is not the case for the Houston Texans. I want you to put your finger on the pulse of the fan base right now.
I think I have to call a doctor. Like the pulse is going through the roof, man. I mean, even with just like you see what they did last year, and there were expectations they were going to be much better than they had been last year. Good coach, a offensive system that they were going to start running that's been successful basically everywhere it's gone. New quarterbacks, some new faces around the team. Like there were high hopes for improvement. There were not high hopes for, let's go win the AFC South and win a playoff game. And then that happens, and you're like, oh, okay. Then they have this massive offseason following up an offseason that was really big last year. And if I put my finger on the pulse of the Texans fan base, you'd look around and you'd be like, it's too high. You have to call a doctor, okay? Yeah. It's just people are so excited. It's among the most excited that this fan base has ever been, and certainly the most excited they've been in probably a decade.
Yeah. So now let's get into some of the moves that they made, and obviously the biggest one is trading for Stefon Diggs. Now, you're a fantasy guy. You've played the game. Obviously, Stefon Diggs was a tale of two seasons last year. Yeah. First half of the season, before the Bills fired Ken Dorsey, he was the wide receiver 4 in fantasy points per game. After firing Ken Dorsey, promoting Joe Brady, wide receiver 58. And that's just an example of, look, you got a guy who's now in his 30s. He's kind of worn out his welcome in a couple of different places. And our film guy, Brett Whitefield, has said it wasn't just the production, but kind of looked like he lost a step on film in the second half of the season. What have the Texans said about Stefon Diggs? I know you were at practice and got to observe Stefon Diggs. What is the read in the building on Stefon Diggs and what he's going to bring to the Texans?
The read is that this is a guy that's fully equipped to be one of the successful wide receivers age 31 or older. It doesn't happen very often. I think I went and ran the numbers one time, and there's less than 20 wide receivers, less than 15 wide receivers that have been 31 or older over the past decade or so that have gone over 1,000 yards. Well, a couple of the seasons just happened. Like Keenan Allen is one of them.
Mm-hmm.
Like Keenan Allen just had a big season last year in an advanced stage. And I don't know how many people would tell you Keenan Allen is for sure better than Stefon Diggs. Like I don't know if there's many people that way. So the Texans unexpectedly were able to add Stefon Diggs. Like the way Nick Caserio talks about it, it doesn't seem like they were calling Buffalo like, hey, can we get Stefon Diggs? It seems like it kind of came up that, hey, Houston's got a little bit of cap space. Would you guys be interested in trading for Stefon Diggs? And they all looked around at each other like, yeah, we'd trade for Stefon Diggs. Because again, the Texans tried to get Keenan Allen, another older wide receiver with a little versatility. The big thing for me with Diggs is he adds to this wide receiver room that Bobby Slowick and the wide receivers proved last year is super interchangeable. Tank Dell can play inside and outside. Nico Collins can step inside and win outside. And then Stefon Diggs, it's one practice. I don't want to rate it, but Stefon Diggs can play inside and outside and played inside a bunch in the practice where we got to see him in his Texans debut, so to speak. So I think the versatility is a big deal. And then Nico Collins talked about, hey, we needed a guy like Stefon Diggs to sort of set the tone in the wide receiver room. The vet, the leader. Nico joked he'd been watching Diggs since middle school, which I don't think the veterans ever love hearing that. And it was a joke because I tried to do the time and I was like, Nico wasn't in middle school. Diggs isn't that old, but he did watch him in high school. And so they really wanted a guy like Stefon Diggs. And if he comes in and he's the consummate professional, the production's going to be there. If he comes in there and he's Stefon Diggs and he wants the ball, well, go get open. You'll get the ball. I think that's the way that the Texans look at it.
So Nico Collins just got his contract extension. And correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm sure you've looked into the details a little bit more than I have. But it almost looks like the Texans modeled it after the Devontae Smith deal, with one notable exception. Nico Collins obviously doesn't have the fifth year option because he wasn't a first round pick. But that's a pretty big investment into Nico Collins after really just one breakout season. What is that deal? Is my comparison right? And how do they feel about him moving forward?
That was definitely the framework that Nico Collins and his agent went to the Texans with, and the Texans seemed happy to work off of that. They've built in a little bit of sort of guaranteed money protection into the way the contract's structured, but ultimately, look, it's a 3-year extension up to $75 million. If you waited a few months, this gets more expensive because there's big contracts on the horizon. If you waited another year, like so for instance, Nico Collins plays out his rookie contract, you slap the franchise tag on him so you can negotiate with him and he doesn't hit regular free agency, he's a $30 million wide receiver if he pulls off what he did last year. But to Nico Collins' point, I mean, he's made less than $4 million, less than $3 million in the NFL up to this point. Like, it's pretty hard if you're Nico Collins to say, yeah, no, I'll just wait a year and get an extra $5 million a year, or you can break me off $17 million in a signing bonus right now, and I can take care of literally everything in my life with that amount of money. I understand why they built in protections. I also understand why Nico said yes, and I certainly understand the price range. This guy performed like a top 10 wide receiver last year. Go out there and pay him. Now, if he turns into the first 2 years of Nico Collins, this thing's a disaster, and we're all wondering what the hell were they doing. Well, that's kind of why you have the little built-in protection there in the contract where they can kind of, get rid of it after, a couple of seasons and not take a huge guaranteed money hit or something like that. But I don't believe it's going to be a step back. Nico's changed his body. Nico's gotten good coaching. Nico's got a better quarterback than when he was playing the past couple of seasons. And then to kind of illustrate the type of dude that Nico Collins is, and you hear Nick Caserio talk about he's the type of guy that kind of embodies what we want. He gets the big contract. The very next day is an OTA practice. The guy running the best drills, Nico Collins. The guy running the hardest at the drills, Nico Collins. Goes to the podium to talk about it. I haven't done anything. I just got started. There's so much more. What do you want to improve in your game specifically? Bobby Slowick told us, and defense coordinator Matt Burke told us, they give players tape on one thing they have to fix over the offseason and say, fix this, let's work on this, let's go over it for like 6 weeks. And when Nico Collins was asked, hey, what's your one thing? He's like, I have to get better at everything. Like I need to do everything better. And it's like, I just wonder how many guys get $75 million and show up to work the very next day and are putting in as much effort as they possibly can. I mean, it's probably the guys that could be greats or could be consistently really good in this league, and that's maybe Nico Collins at this point.
Continuing down the wide receiver path, And then we'll wrap it up with kind of an overarching question. How's Tank Dell doing? Obviously with the injury, and then of course the tragedy, he was shot this offseason.
So the injury, it's not often that you talk about, oh, that was a good injury, because it wasn't any sort of like CL injury. No PCL, no MCL, no ACL, any of that stuff that happened in the season last year. He broke his leg. It's a bone. It heals. He's a young man. He drank his milk. The injury wasn't a concern. Obviously, the near tragedy of getting shot a few weeks before he gets back on the football field, I knew there was going to be some hesitation and some worry coming out of that. As you hear more of the story, thankfully, it's not as serious as it could have been. Obviously, it could have been far more serious from a life or death standpoint. It could have been far more serious from the type of injury. It seems like it's not an injury that was going to linger for him. I say is not going to linger for, or wasn't going to linger for him. I don't think it is lingering for him, because his workout videos, he looks faster than he did last year, which is a scary thought if you're an opposing defender. And then watching him in person, I mean, it is, you always hear this with basketball, but I think it's true in football. The great ones glide. I mean, Tank is just gliding on the field. Like, it's effortless taking care of business on the field. And I start to think, like, who's going to defend Tank Dell? Well, if Diggs is outside and Collins is outside, it's going to be a nickel corner. Good luck. It's going to be a linebacker. Good luck. It's going to be a safety. Good luck. There's a real chance to me. The volume may not be there, but there's a real chance Tank is a better player and to a noticeable degree in 2024 than he was as a rookie in 2023. And again, the volume may not be there to satisfy us seeing it every week, but he is a grinder. He puts in work. And I think because he has a lot to prove based off of, oh, well, he's a little guy, he got hurt, I think there's still that chip on his shoulder that he wants to go out there and show things off.
So let's look at some current ADPs. I'm going to use Underdog Fantasy because I think that's where the best drafts are doing right now.
Yep.
We have Nico Collins at wide receiver 15. He's a late second round pick. We have Stefon Diggs at wide receiver 18. He's an early third round pick. We have Tank Dell at wide receiver 26. He's an early fourth round pick. My question to you is, if you were betting today, who is the best fantasy play on the Houston Texans offense from those wide receivers, taking those ADPs kind of into account?
Man, this is it. I don't think it's Diggs, and here's why. Because I just feel like you're probably pivoting to something else or doing something else by the time you get to Diggs. Like I would think most people are emphasizing, let me get a surefire one, even if it's a lesser team than what the Texans are expected to be. Let me get a running back maybe finally. I'll say this, as far as fantasy drafts that I've already partaken in, I've prioritized getting Nico, because even with the addition of Stefon Diggs, even with hopefully the rushing attack being better, I still feel like that connection between CJ Stroud and Nico Collins is there. They trust Nico Collins. They ask him to run some really tough routes. They ask him to run routes over the middle, and he gladly runs them and then catches the ball and then runs people over. So I've been prioritizing getting Nico, but I'm not afraid to go out there and get Diggs if Nico goes a little bit earlier, or I think I can wait and I miss him. And then I've tried to get a fair amount of Collins and Tank Dell stacks. Because if look, Nico Collins, I know he stayed healthy last year for the most part. It's a guy that missed quite a few football games the previous 2 years. And if he's just a little achy or a little gimpy and you got two other wide receivers, hey, let's give him a break, especially if it's maybe an NFC game before a divisional game, or an NFC game before a different AFC game, or late in the season when they play 3 games in 10 days. Hey, if the guy's got a little hitch in his get along, take a rest. We'll get you ready for the final stretch here. And then maybe it's Dell and Diggs for a couple of games, or maybe it's Collins and Dell, because Diggs finally has a little bit of age and he misses a game here or there. So I'm not afraid to go and get any of those guys, but I've tried to put a lot of Nico and Tank together a lot when it comes to those wide receivers. I don't know if Diggs is going to stay right there. So I'm waiting for a move to happen. I'm waiting for him to get closer to Nico so I can go him instead of Nico because Nico's gone, or I'm waiting for him to get closer to Tank so I can kind of choose between those two.
So let's go to CJ Stroud, obviously, who had arguably the greatest rookie season we've seen from a quarterback. At the very least, one of the best we've seen since Dan Marino came into the league in the 1980s. And one of the things that I think you understand about sports discourse in these days, I think it's really prevalent in the NBA, but it happens in the NFL as well. It's more of a what have you done for me lately kind of deal. And when the new car smell expires, then all of a sudden a guy who's getting talked about as the next great quarterback is like, oh, well, what has he won? Like it's happened with Trevor Lawrence. It happens with Justin Herbert. So the question is not to go into the hot take kind of breakdown. But the question is, if CJ Stroud is not going to fall next into line of, oh, Trevor Lawrence, we were hyping this guy up, and Justin Herbert, we were hyping this guy up, what does he need to get better at?
Ooh, I would tell you that structurally executing is probably what I would say he's going to add to his game. Don't get me wrong, CJ Stroud, when stuff falls apart because they played 72 million different offensive line combinations last year, he can go out there and go make a play. There were times last year, and I feel like we saw it more in the first half of the season, but it popped up here or there. He does not have to go play hero ball this season like maybe at different times he did last year. Because again, as good as Tank was in and out of the lineup a couple of times. As good as Nico Collins was, he missed a couple of games. He missed two and then left one after one play. So like there were some moments where CJ Stroud was kind of having to just figure it out. Hey, who can I get the ball to? I have to go out there and make a play. I have to use my legs. I don't have to use my legs. So I think within the structure now of this offense, it should allow him to operate and just find the open guy, make the play and go. The old, hey, you can't go broke you're taking a profit, just what's there, make it happen and keep things on track and keep things on rhythm. There doesn't need to be a spectacular play until you absolutely have to make that spectacular play. And I think playing within the structure of the offense, which should be able to get just about anybody open at different times. Like you think about these three wide receivers we've talked about, Dalton Schultz running around there, like they're going to have somebody open. Just go find the open guy, hit that guy, keep things rolling, keep things moving. And then I thought this was an interesting comment from offensive coordinator Bobby Slowick, and it kind of plays into the stay within yourself, play within yourself. He said year 2 feels like a make or break year for quarterbacks based on the way he's seen quarterbacks operate. It sets the tone for your career, and it allows you, because your head's spinning as a rookie, it allows you to hone in on fundamentals. And when I think about fundamentals, I think about don't try to do too much. And so I think about, again, operating within the system. So I think last year some of it was necessary. I think this year it's going to be trying to balance, hey, let's just run the play. Let's just hit the open guy. Let's move the chains. Let's keep it going. Let's roll out. Let's just chunk it up. Nico's down there somewhere, sliding catch against the Colts in a win or go home game. I think there'd be less of that, more of, my gosh, CJ Stroud's just in rhythm. He's just dicing this opposing defense apart, and the offense is humming. I think there's going to be a lot of that from the Texans this year.
You posted a tweet from Bobby Slowick's media availability after the Texans open OTA, and it said this. Bobby Slowick said, "It doesn't matter the scheme. Joe Mixon is a good running back, works hard, and has done it all in the NFL." And I found that interesting because Bobby Slowick was pretty open last year that Dameon Pierce was not a great scheme fit. Now, we didn't bury Dameon Pierce, right, but he was pretty open that that's why his success wasn't the same as his rookie season. And now you look at the moves the Texans made. Devin Singletary was a good player for them last year. They let him walk, decided to give up an asset for Joe Mixon, and then sign Joe Mixon to a multi-year contract. Everything that they did to me suggests they view Joe Mixon as a relatively significant upgrade on Devin Singletary. Is that the right assessment? And what do you expect from Joe Mixon?
Yes, that's the right assessment. And before they ended up with Mixon, they kind of ended up with Joe Mixon. They kind of settled for Joe Mixon. They wanted Saquon Barkley. I mean, they desperately wanted Saquon Barkley. The money didn't work out. Saquon's desire to play the Cowboys, twice a year, that factored into it a little bit because I think the money was pretty close. So they wanted a multi-purpose bell cow. And when Barkley wasn't there and some of the other guys had come off the board, they made the call on Joe Mixon and they got him. I tell you, I think Mixon is the guy that I'm most excited about where he's going in drafts on this Texans offense. They're going to run the football. They want to run the football. They desperately need to improve their rushing attack. They were 22nd in yards per game last year. They were 29th or 30th in yards per carry. They might have been 31st. It was a bottom 5 yards per carry number. And yeah, Dameon Pierce could not click in the system. They finally got Devin Singletary going, but there's a limit to what Singletary can do. And on top of everything they dealt with last year with the running backs, the offensive line was constantly shuffling around. This year, they've got a chance to go out there and run 5 guys out there, hopefully healthy, that they wanted to be on the field. Okay, a former first-round pick in Kenyon Green at left guard, a former second-round pick in Juice Scruggs, who had to play a lot of left guard last year at center, and then obviously we know about the tackles in Tunsil and Howard, and then Shaq Mason at right guard. Like, if they get the O-line they want, and they've got Joe Mixon, they're going to run the football. They're going to grind people out late in games when they have a lead, and that's going to be on the back of Joe Mixon. I mean, they brought this guy in here because he's a do-it-all back, and he's a guy that can be a bell cow, and there's not a guy behind him. And look, Dameon Pierce showed up to OTAs. He's trimmed up. He looks more agile. He looks quicker. D'Amico Ryans mentioned he'd love to have him be, successful and be the 1-2 punch with Joe Mixon, and that would be great. You can't bet on that if you're the Texans until you see it in training camp and until you see it in preseason games. As long as you don't see that, Joe Mixon, I'm buying as much Joe Mixon stock as I can, because you mentioned the contract extension. That what they did was they just turned that into basically 2 years of guaranteed money and then see you later, Joe Mixon. And so I wonder if he's just going to get run into the ground for the next couple of years, and they're just going to go to Joe and they're going to trust him to be the bell cow for the next couple of years. And I'm very excited. And he is a physical specimen at the running back spot that this Texans team has maybe never had. Like, I mean, he's not Arian Foster. Arian was a glider. He didn't look like he could run some people over. Mixon looks like he's got 2 filing cabinets for legs. Like, he looks like $1 million out there in OTAs. There's only so much you can glean from OTAs, especially for running backs. It's, how does a guy look? All the running backs look to be in great shape, led by Joe Mixon, who looks like freaking Mr. Universe out there.
Yeah, just to add on to the one point you made, actually, in this day and age, when I see a running back on a second contract, or I think it's Joe Mixon's 3rd contract, but when I see that second year added on, I actually consider that significant. Because that's something even Josh Jacobs didn't get this offseason, even though he has that 4-year deal. It's kind of a 1-year deal. But I want to wrap this all up by asking again about Dameon Pierce. Is there a chance he's not on this roster come week 1?
Absolutely. Yeah, there's absolutely a chance he's not on the roster. I mean, you've got, Daria Gumbawale's in camp, not for any fantasy relevancy, but he's kind of the special teams 3rd down back guy. But Jawar Jordan, when you read his rookie scouting report, and you think about what he did at Louisville, he's supposed to be the zone guy. Okay. He's supposed to be the zone guy. He's supposed to just trust his eyes, operate and execute the play, and hit a bunch of singles, doubles, triples. The next thing you know, he hits a home run. He's got 2 kickoff returns for touchdowns at Louisville. Like, there's a little bit of juice to Jordan. They paid a tremendous amount of money to British Brooks, who used to be at North Carolina, bigger back. I mean, it's him and Jawar Jordan. I think there's a 40-pound difference between the two of them, the 2 rookies in camp. And then there's a lot of money left if they need to go out there and get a veteran who gets cut or waived or something like that to be behind Joe Mixon. So, yeah, Dameon Pierce, he's got to get it right or he's on another team. I don't think he would be, a street guy. I think there's somebody that could use Dameon Pierce, and maybe it's a, late round pick. But yeah, there's a chance he's not on the team. I would tell you it's a greater chance that he's RB2 than not on the team, but there's not a big difference between those two.
Cody Stutes talks with great conviction about the Houston Texans, and you can follow his work at Houston Football and also on YouTube. So kind of a little bit of a YouTube crossover here for Franchise Focus, and follow him on Twitter at Cody_Stutes. There we go. I got that out. Cody, it was wonderful having you join me for Franchise Focus Houston Texans, one of the most exciting teams in the NFL out of absolutely nowhere. But we're looking forward to your work, and we're going to be following you during training camp.
It's always a pleasure. I'm upset that I didn't throw in a Fugazi this year, because I know that I was able to sneak that in a bunch of times last year. And I have one big dynasty tip for everybody. One big dynasty tip when it comes to the Texans. Go get Cade Stover. Go get Cade Stover.
I'm sorry I forgot to ask about him because my producer Thomas is the dynasty guy at FantasyPoints. So, all right, you know what? Let's expand on that.
Okay.
Let's talk about Cade Stover.
So when you look at what Stover, I thought he was the second best tight end in the draft. And you look at what he was able to do at Ohio State early on into the tight end position. So he was third in receiving yards and targets, I believe, the past couple of years at Ohio State with a bunch of talent around him, like a bunch of pass catching talent around him, not just Marvin Harrison Jr., but other 5-star guys, big time names, maybe a future first in Ibuka. And then Dalton Schultz is here for the next few seasons. So Stover has the ability to kind of ramp up to the tight end position because he's still young in the position. And Schultz talked about it. He said, he beats me to meetings, which is crazy. And he told me, I'm watching you. I'm still new to the position. I'm watching you. I'm going to learn from you. And it takes him, like physically, it takes him a second to get going when he's moving. But when he gets moving, it's like a semi-truck that's not downshifting. Like he moves at a good pace. And I thought there was a moment in one of the OTAs, rookie mini camps, one of the things, I thought there was a moment him and second round pick Kamari Lassiter were about to just collide because Schultz caught a little ball on the side. Lassiter was flying in, and I was like, there's no pads, don't do it. And they both pulled up, but Cade Stover's going to run some people over. But it's not going to happen in 2024 probably, and it may not happen in 2025. But his stuff aligns at the perfect time to take over as a worthwhile and productive tight end as Dalton Schultz is being shown the door by this team. And I've never heard Nick Caserio talk about a late-round pick the way they talk about Stover. You know, fourth round, call it late round if you want. I say it's late round because it's the third day. But he says that basically this guy embodies the type of football player they look for in the draft. He went on a gushing, 90-second, just soliloquy about everything about Cade Stover that he loves. And Stover and C.J. Stroud are buddies, and C.J. Stroud ain't going anywhere. You may have to just sit and wait, but it's not a big investment to go get him in Dynasty. Just grab him, sit him there for a couple of years, and we know how tough it is to find long-term options at tight end. I truly believe, with conviction, Cade Stover's going to play about a decade in this league, take his NFL money, go retire on a farm in Ohio, and call it a career and call it a life. And I just believe in Cade Stover, man.
If there's anything I loved more than doing my job, it's when I talk to somebody who makes doing my job really easy. That's Cody Stutes with his unsolicited Dynasty take. Again, you can follow his work at Houston Football and on YouTube with his YouTube crossover at Cody_Stutes on Twitter. Cody, it was wonderful talking to you, and we'll talk to you again, and we'll make sure we're keeping up with you during training camp.
Absolutely. No, anytime.